I found out my fiancé had a secret apartment for another man. Hi, Reddit. I never imagined I'd share something like this, but I think you should hear this story through to the end. I've always seen myself as a calm, loyal, and devoted person, especially in love. But apparently, my whole life was preparing me for the moment when I'd realized that faith in someone can crumble in an instant, like a sandcastle. My name is Alex, I'm 28, and I live in London. I had a girlfriend, Sophia. She seemed perfect, smart, attractive, with amazing taste and charm that could captivate an entire room. We'd been together for almost 4 years. Everyone around us thought we were the ideal couple, and I thought so too. We rented a small but comfortable apartment in the center. We had shared goals, trips together, and on the surface, everything was going smoothly. But one late evening, I accidentally saw an unusual message in her email. At first, I didn't pay attention. It was a letter from a real estate agency with an address and access codes to another apartment. My heart sank when I realized it wasn't for the two of us, but separate housing registered only to Sophia. My intuition told me something was off, but logic tried to convince me. Maybe it's a surprise for a relative or work-related. I started paying closer attention. The next day, Sophia suddenly asked for help with some documents, and I noticed she seemed especially agitated, as if afraid I'd discover something. I tried asking directly, but she just joked it off and changed the subject. That's when I decided to figure it out on my own. I took a day off and claiming I had errands headed to that address. My heart was pounding like it wanted to jump out. There was a small lock on the door, just like the one described in the letter. I entered and was stunned. Inside, everything was luxurious in a modern style with high-end furniture and elements that Sophia had never mentioned. And then my eyes fell on a note on the table. "Don't expect to catch me here." Everything inside me broke. In that moment, I realized Sophia was hiding someone or something from me. My imagination ran wild, secret partner, hidden dates, lie after lie. I felt a wave of shock, rage, and betrayal, and what was even scarier, I realized this could have been going on for weeks and I hadn't even suspected. I returned to our apartment, trying to act like nothing happened, but inside, a boiling sense of deception that words can't convey. I replayed every little thing in my memory, every episode where she might have been hiding something. Every glance, remark, movement. Now everything took on a different meaning. The next day, I carefully checked her gadget, messages, email, and everything I found confirmed my darkest fears. Sophia was seeing someone behind my back. Every rendezvous was masterfully disguised, every detail cleverly hidden. I felt my world turning upside down. I tried to figure out why. Why was she doing this? For what? I felt like I'd fallen into the plot of a detective movie where I was the victim who hadn't noticed the obvious. Questions piled up. How long had she been hiding it? Who was this guy? And why hadn't I, Alex, ever spotted the signs before? And here I am, Reddit, because I don't know what to do next. Trust is broken, the relationship is on the edge of the abyss, and I feel like a betrayed guy trapped in the cage of my own attachment. Two Alexes are fighting inside me. One wants to leave and erase everything, the other wants to figure it out, forgive, and hold on to the remnants. But the answer to what now eludes me. The next day, I decided I couldn't take it anymore in this constant stress, pretending I knew nothing, as if our relationship was the same as before. I knew every step now required tact, because any mistake could finish it all off, and I needed to hear the truth from Sophia herself. I waited until we were alone, when she might not be able to dodge the questions, to finally face reality head-on. When she came home in the evening, I was sitting on the sofa trying to stay calm, but my heart was pounding like it was about to burst. I looked at Sophia and tried to say evenly, though a storm of emotions raged inside. "Sophia, we need to talk," I said, trying not to falter. She looked at me, her smile forced, like a fake mask her eyes couldn't hide. She instantly sensed something was wrong, and her face paled as if she'd seen a ghost. "What's wrong?" she asked, pretending not to understand. I took a deep breath and let it out. "I know about the second apartment, Sophia. I was there, and I know someone lives there. Or you're seeing someone behind my back." At first, she froze, then a mix of anger and panic flashed in her eyes. I saw her searching for words to fool me, but I couldn't let myself believe her excuses anymore. We argued. I bombarded her with questions one after another, each of her statements becoming more defensive and strained. "Alex, it's not what you think," she said finally, but her voice trembled and I felt the truth was close, but she wasn't ready to give it up yet. I tried to dig deeper. Was it a lover? A friend? What secret had she been hiding so carefully for weeks? Every word from her seemed like an attempt to veil reality. and I felt like I was on the verge of a discovery that would turn everything upside down. I recalled every little thing: suspicious calls, evening outings without reason, strange expenses, and purchases she made in secret. All these details now formed a mosaic, and I saw her true face, which had once seemed almost flawless to me. I realized our story would never go back to how it was, and the trust we'd built over years was destroyed in an instant, like a sandcastle under a wave. Sophia finally confessed, not fully, but enough for me to understand that my worst suspicions were true. She really did have another guy, and the apartment was for him. With every second of her story, I felt something cracking inside, as if my hands could no longer hold what had been our shared life. I tried to comprehend how I could have missed this earlier, how I could have trusted someone who was secretly building her own life behind my back. The conversation dragged on for almost an hour. I interrogated, she answered, sometimes evading the point, sometimes outright lying. But I'd already grasped the main thing. The passion that had seemed genuine to me was actually a mirage, artfully woven to cover the betrayal. And though part of me wanted to yell, cry, and smash everything around, another part realized I needed to stay cool or I'd become part of this collapse myself. In the end, I stood up and said, "Sophia, I can't go on like this. You've broken our trust and I can't just let it go. It's time for me to leave." She tried to grab my hand, pleading, "Alex, please let me explain." But I'd already made my decision. I knew our story was over, even though just recently I'd believed in our future. That evening, I went out on the balcony of our apartment, staring at the twinkling lights of London and feeling the emptiness around me become almost tangible. I thought about how many days, weeks, and months I'd lived in deception, not seeing the truth, and how bitter it was to realize that passion could be fake. But inside me, an idea was also born that sometimes leaving is the only way to save yourself, the only way to protect what's still pure and true within. And though I knew weeks of regrets, doubts, and internal struggle lay ahead, I also felt that I'd taken the first step toward liberation from a toxic bond that had been undermining my life from within, and that in the long run, perhaps, I'd be able to trust and love again, but with vigilance, with an awareness of the cost of trust and sincerity in a relationship. The days following that evening became a real test for me, Alex, as if every minute pulled me into an abyss of suspicions and suffering, and every step through the streets of London felt heavy, as if the entire metropolis reflected the inner chaos raging in me after Sophia's secret came to light. I couldn't just return to routine, because every memory of her smile, her tone, how she gently took my hand, was now poisoned by the bitterness of deception, and I constantly caught myself thinking that everything we'd built together turned out to be a myth. I tried to focus on work, but the thoughts wouldn't let go, and every notification on my phone caused a tremor because I feared new texts from Sophia, feared she'd try to convince me to restore trust or make excuses. Deep down, I knew forgiving her was impossible, and trying would break me even more. But at the same time, I was drawn to her, as part of me still sought justification, explanation, though my reason screamed that it shouldn't be. Close friends started noticing the change in me. Buddies asked what happened, but I just shook my head, trying to hide the inner turmoil. I saw how my colleague Emma looked at me with slight surprise and concern, trying to figure out what was going on, and I realized that those around me sensed the shift in my energy, in my state, and I had to pretend everything was fine, though inside I was crushed. Every night I replayed the conversation with Sophia in my head, every gesture, every word, and tried to understand why she went for this betrayal, what pushed her to seek a secret partner, hiding the apartment and deceiving me for weeks. I tried to find justification, but each time I hit emptiness, realizing that the passion I'd believed in was a deception, and I'd become just an element of her manipulation. But life doesn't freeze, even when your soul is tearing apart. I started thinking about how to move forward, how to regain trust in people, how to feel stability again, and gradually I realized that the first step is to accept the suffering, acknowledge that the betrayal happened, and not try to justify it, because only through honesty with yourself can you regain inner strength. A few weeks after the breakup, I got an unexpected call from Sophia. Her tone was quiet, almost pleading, and she tried to justify her actions, talking about her anxieties, isolation, and how she wanted to revive our relationship through a forbidden adventure. But I realized her words no longer had power over me. I listened, nodded, asked a couple of questions to understand what she was going through, and then just hung up. I realized that sometimes people choose destruction, and you can't change someone else's choice, but you can choose your own path, and my path was now free from mirages and lies. A month later, I started seeing a therapist to process what happened, to learn to trust again and define my boundaries in relationships. And each session was like a small building block restoring the destroyed foundation of my soul. I understood that the betrayal would leave scars, but those scars would serve as a reminder that true passion requires sincerity and respect, and that I could never again allow myself to be deceived under the guise of an ideal couple. One evening, walking along the Thames embankment, I watched the reflections of lights in the water and thought about how passion can be deceptive, how loved ones can betray, but life flows on, and every choice, even painful, leads to self-discovery. I realized that Sophia made her choice, and I made mine, to leave for my own sake, for my integrity and future, where trust and respect would be the foundation of new relationships. The ending turned out to be both painful and liberating. I lost the passion I'd trusted, but gained insight that true strength lies in the ability to see the truth and act in harmony with yourself, even if it destroys what seemed eternal. And in this drama of deception, I found a lesson. You can't let others dictate your fate, you can't ignore betrayal for the sake of a myth, and that true passion is when two people build a life on sincerity, respect, and trust, not on secret apartments and lies. When word of Sophia and her hidden apartment started slowly leaking into our circle, I felt like every step I took was now being analyzed, commented on, as if I'd become the hero of someone else's play that I didn't want to be in. Friends, coworkers, and even distant acquaintances who had been indifferent before started asking tactful questions, making hints, and every time someone mentioned her name, a mix of irritation and exhaustion flared up inside me, as if every phrase was a jab and every glance a judgment for once trusting her. My close friend Emma, with whom I sometimes wandered around London after shifts, sat across from me in a cafe, her gaze reflecting a mix of empathy and shock. She didn't hide that she was stunned by Sophia's behavior and delicately asked how I was coping, understanding that the suffering I was going through could be unbearable for anyone who'd ever relied on another. And looking at her, I realized how valuable it is to have people around who see reality and don't judge hastily. Family ties also made themselves felt. Sophia's parents, upon learning about the matter, first tried to defend her, explaining that it's all from stress and pressure. But with each description from me, each confirmation of the apartment and secret partner's existence, their expressions changed. From confusion and doubt to despair and grief, because they understood that their daughter hadn't just hidden a secret, but a parallel life behind my back, and the trust between us was destroyed forever. Trying to restore at least fragments of my personal routine, I started seeing friends more often. But every time the conversation turned to feelings and couples, I felt the shadow of deception hanging over me, and that no one, even the closest, could fully comprehend what it means to live with the realization that your other half secretly created another reality behind your back, and every piece of advice from friends. Every comment like, "Just let her go," bumped into my internal struggle between the desire to let go and the need to close this chapter for good. Work became my refuge, but even there I felt the echoes. Colleagues who accidentally knew about the events looked at me with curiosity and interest, and sometimes even with a hint of reproach, as if I should have prevented it all in advance, though no one knows how hard it is to trust when the soul naively believes in the honesty of a loved one. And this public reaction added a layer of tension and fatigue, draining me emotionally and making me seek solitude to escape the stream of others' judgments for a while. Internal dialogues became my salvation. I recorded all ideas, all emotions, every what if and why, trying to understand where I stumbled, where I was blind to hints, and where Sophia was so clever that she hid her intentions so deeply that even the most vigilant couldn't detect them. And every evening before rest, I returned to these reflections, realizing that forgiveness and understanding are different things, and that I must learn to separate my feelings from others' actions to become the master of my fate again. At the same time, I began to dissect what exactly led to this tragedy. Our conversations about the future, her constant pressure on the budget, desire for control, my efforts to maintain balance, and the realization that sometimes passion turns into a high-stakes gamble where trust and emotional security are at stake. And if someone decides to cheat, the outcome is always destructive. The final lesson of this story gradually formed in my head. Betrayal can't always be prevented, and you can't always predict others' steps, but you can choose your response. You can learn to set boundaries, and you can build relationships so that sincerity and respect are integral. And let the scars remain on the soul, They will serve as a reminder that trust can't be given thoughtlessly, and passion shouldn't be based on fear, secrets, and deception, even if it seems emotions are stronger than any logic. When I finally decided that this part of my life must be over, I understood that forgiveness doesn't mean erasing memory, and doesn't mean returning to the old, but means consciously distancing yourself from a harmful situation that could break your essence, your values, and your concept of trust. I started with the simple. I told Sophia that I didn't want to continue anymore, that every secret, every lie, and every hidden apartment had destroyed everything that connected us, and that now our paths must diverge. Her response was as I predicted, a mix of rage, bewilderment, and despair. She tried to justify her steps with talks of pressure, financial need, and fear of losing me. But no justification could fill the abyss that had arisen between us. And in that moment, I realized that sometimes people, even those we adore, make choices that contradict all ethical and human norms, and that no emotions justify betrayal that leaves a mark for life. The social consequences turned out to be unexpectedly strong. Friends I trusted supported me unconditionally, shared my pain, and were amazed at how far Sophia had gone in her parallel life. Colleagues who had discussed me with curiosity and suspicion before now began to look with respect, as at a person who overcame a catastrophe, didn't descend to revenge, and didn't let anger rule his life, but simply made a difficult decision for his own mental and emotional balance. Sophia's parents first tried to stand up for her, assuring that these are just youthful mistakes. But after I presented evidence, they started to distance themselves. And in their looks, I saw a mix of remorse and realization that their daughter's hidden actions had destroyed not only our relationship, but also trust in the family. And that sense of guilt that falls on the shoulders of every parent who ever underestimated the consequences of disguised lies turned out to be heavier than any financial losses. Gradually, over the weeks, I began to restore my routine. I returned to hobbies, meetings with friends, walks around the city, which now seemed not only an arena of deception, but also a field for a fresh start, for self-development and reevaluation of ideals that I'd always considered key. Sincerity, transparency, respect for myself and others, and the realization that sometimes forgiveness is an act not for the offender, but for yourself, to free yourself from anger, resentment, and helplessness. A few months later, I met people who became a new source of trust and support for me. Their existence was open, honest, and I gradually began to understand that the experience of betrayal, no matter how destructive the situation, can become a powerful lesson that teaches you to distinguish those worthy of your openness from those who exploit trust as a tool for their secret intrigues. And this insight gave me inner strength that had seemed unattainable before. Sophia, in turn, faced the consequences of her actions. The secret partner she'd so carefully hidden learned about the exposure of her double life, and their connection collapsed, leaving her with a sense of guilt, and understanding that deception can't last forever without retribution, and that every action, even the most clever and carefully disguised, sooner or later leads to a crash that can't be undone. The final lesson of the story that I took away was simple but profound. Human trust is a sacred space that can't be defiled without payback. Passion doesn't imply submission, and respect for a partner isn't in manipulations or secrets. And most importantly, sometimes true triumph lies not in punishing those who deceived you, but in preserving your own dignity, restoring your boundaries, and learning to walk through life with an open heart, despite the scars of the past. And when I looked at the city, at the streets that had once been the arena of my torment, now filled with light and fresh energy, I understood that betrayal leaves scars, but it shouldn't dictate your tomorrow. Every new day is an opportunity to create a life based on sincerity, respect, and inner peace. And it was this realization that gave me a sense of redemption, albeit with bitterness in my soul, because the lessons life gives are sometimes the most painful, the most valuable.